Энэ бол iPhone 6s. Тийм ч их өөрчлөгдөөгүй. Гэхдээ 3-ны даралтыг мэдэрнэ. Ингэснээр текстийн мэдээллийг уншихад өөр болсон. Имэйл уншихад, мэдээ уншихад байз. Чи мэдээ уншдаг гэж юу?
Яп.
Тэгэлгүй дээ. Камер нь 4К бичлэг хийж селфи хийхэд эргэцэн гэрэлтүүлж өгнө. Энд ч нэгсэл лайк цуглуулна да.
Thanks.
Зургнууд нь бас өөрчлөгдөж амьд болсон. Та хүрээд үз. Тийм ээ, энэ бол өөрчлөгдсөн зүйлс.
Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр манай дефакто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Дэлхийн Банкны Монгол дахь суурин төлөөлөгч Жеймс Андерсон оролцож байна. Hi.
Hi, Jago.
You have recently, World Bank issued your report on current economic situation at this time when the parliament discusses the budget. It's a really on-time report to me, plus very realistic and relevant. What was the particular points that attracted your attention in this report?
Oh, well, thank you, and thanks for saying the nice words about the report. This is one of our periodic reports that we put out twice a year to try to give our own independent analysis and assessment of the situation. We also have some other regional reports that we put out on the macroeconomy. This one, I think, in some ways carries a similar message to what we've said in the past. For the past year or 2 years, the story of the Mongolian economy has been one of coming down off of a very, very steep spike in foreign investment and managing that coming down in the share of foreign direct investment in the economy. At the same time, external factors have not been favorable. At the same time, external factors have also been not too favorable. So Mongolian economy depends a lot on commodity price exports, and the fall in the price of commodities, somewhat slowing rate of growth in the main trading partner, et cetera. These are all sort of shocks that have compounded what was already a difficult situation with a slowing economy.
It's kind of a reflection of what was happening up to now, in a way.
Right.
But it most shocking for me, in a way, news was you have downgraded or your forecast for this year economy from 3.3 to 2.2. But most importantly, next year, from 3.5 or so to 0.8 or less than 1%.
Right.
So why?
Right. Well, we make our forecasts, of course, based on the information that is coming. And
of course.
With a country like Mongolia, which is a small country, heavily dependent on commodities, heavily dependent on the external environment, heavily dependent on big projects and progress on big projects. You can have big lumpy things make a big bump to the economy. It can be positive or negative. What we saw as we were preparing this report was that the third quarter industrial production came in lower than was expected. The difficult summer drought and weak agricultural harvest also contributed to that. And what we're seeing next year is in some ways a reverse of the pattern this year. So this year, the overall growth, as you said, is expected to come down a bit, but the growth that is there has been driven largely by growth in the mining sector. So the non-mining sector actually did worse in 2015. What we're expecting next year is a little bit of the reverse. So with the commodity prices going down, we're seeing a difficult first half of the year in the mining sector. In the non-mining sector, we actually see a bit of a rebound coming around the
Based on what?
The second
what
half.
kind of rebound is happening?
The balancing out of the situation for the non-mining sector, so the service economy, et cetera. We're of course looking for some big investments to come in next year. When the investments start flowing, we'll have to see. But when the investments come in, that's like an injection to an economy, and it has linkages to the rest of the economy as well. So all of the supplier companies, services that are needed to support expanded investment, those are the ones that we see picking up.
Mongolians now, based on the information we received, expecting OT keeps moving. They have started already underground operation, and they're about $5 billion. Certain part probably, maybe, I don't know when, but how much money, probably half of it all coming next year to Mongolia, and that's what you mean, a big project.
Yeah, it's a big question is when is the timing of when the money starts coming. So we know it will come. We know, but we don't know as well about the exact timing of the flows and disbursements into the country. And as those come, then that will stimulate more investment in other sectors, as well as services, et cetera.
And meanwhile, because the mining foreign direct investment went down way substantially, and the government has a big deficit, you were expecting this year the deficit to be 5% of GDP, and next year it should be about 11% if we include the debts, not only by the government, also by the development bank, etc. And then the deficit will be even worse. Is it with the calculation of possibly OT extension, or it is without?
Well, for this year, of course, we're mid-November, so we have some idea of what's been happening this year. And what's been happening this year is, of course, much slower growth, which means for the government, less corporate income tax collection, less VAT collection, less personal income tax collection, et cetera. So the amount of revenue that the government has to use during the course of the year has been substantially less than what was predicted and budgeted at the beginning of the year, something like 15% or so below expectations. So the difficulty then is how to manage that partway through the year. So the government's been trying to control spending, particularly on capital projects. A lot of the social welfare transfers and wages and salaries and these sorts of things have been prioritized, and they've been trying to maintain those. But going into next year, the government will again, of course, have to deal with what is a limited resource envelope, and this is the set of difficult choices that governments make around the world of how to manage what is a limited amount of money to be able to spend to address the public investment needs. And
when we talk about around the world, other countries doing, their planned budget does not miss much at the level of 15%, isn't it? It's why we do have such a big a sort of a hole in our budget planning, where three times we discuss one budget for this year.
In the planning process, it's true, Mongolia's budget actual collections do tend historically to come in below, even in good years, for several years, come in below what was originally forecast. And that's driven in part by too optimistic scenarios for revenue collections in the coming year. And too optimistic can mean also, as I said, when you have a small economy that is buffeted by a big wave of falling commodity prices, in the 20-25%, even just the past year.
Exactly.
When these sorts of shocks happen, then that has a big impact on actual revenue collection. So that's a big part of the story in Mongolia and the story for the last few years. A lot of the spending and borrowing that took place several years ago was at a time when commodity prices were very high, and there was a sort of optimism that
the politicians keep, in spite of their hard discussions, they keep following their optimal, very optimistic level of mood. You have reported you have mentioned in this report about the policy to be a little bit, economic policy to be tighter. In that sense, how do you see the result of the price stabilization program for the last 2 years?
Well, the price stabilization program is something, of course, this is a program managed by the central bank. And it's something that we often use the term quasi-fiscal. And the reason we use that term is because it's the type of a program that has a specific cost, and it's the sort of thing that in most countries you would see handled by budget processes rather than by the central bank. So if the country's political system determines that something is a priority for the use of public funds, and then it is put on the table to be considered alongside all the other different things that they might want to spend money on, then it becomes, in a way, more open, more competitive about whether or not this really is a priority. So the price stabilization program was something that was quite expansionary. In the past year, we've seen, however, that this is being phased out, and that's a positive thing.
But still, the government keeps saying that they will extend this subsidized 8% mortgage loan.
Well, yeah, the mortgage program as well is a program that's administered by the government. Many countries in the world find some way to encourage first-time homeowners, especially. But it is a program with a cost, and this is why we have for some time said, it should be carried out through budgetary discussion.
Цаг хугацаа давтагдчихгүй. Харин түүнийг яаж зөвшөөрснөөр бидний амжилт бүтээл, аз жаргал биднийг давтдаг. Урлагийн хүний хувьд гэр бүл, уран бүтээлдээ зарцуулах цагаа зөв зохицуулах хэрэгтэй гэдэг. Бидний хэрэглээ улам ухаалаг болсоор байгаа нь та бүхэнд харагдчих байна. Харин энэ бүхэн надад үнэхээр их таалагдчих.
Ухаалаг орон сууц. King Tower Apartment.
That's what I mean. Both to be, or clearly to be through the budget rather than through the banks. And plus, we have two-tier banking system, and we require the central bank to be independent on the government. In this case, they went together. Now they are shifting their balance anyway to the government balance because it is where they should be.
Well, yeah, I mean, the mechanisms for shifting, I think, is complicated. But the question from our perspective is, where would it make the most sense for this sort of a program to be dealt with as a public policy issue? And the place it would make most sense would be through budgetary discussions where the costs of the program can be weighed against the costs of the many other programs that the government wishes to implement. And that would also allow the central bank to focus more precisely on their main mission of controlling inflation, keeping an eye on banks and these sorts of things.
Well, now let's go to another part of the report where we talk about the depreciation of Mongolian tugreks. If you compare March 13 and March 15, and there were 40% depreciation, which is way high to handle with. And it is a matter of reserve money. It's a matter of shock in the economy. What was the major reason beyond that sharp depreciation?
Well, there are several things to keep in mind about the exchange rate. One, exchange rates, in a way, it's a price, and it moves according to supply and demand, just like any other price. Of course, it's a very important price when companies and banks and others have obligations in one currency or another. But the sorts of things that generally influence exchange rates are the foreign investment coming in. So the big decline in the rate of foreign investment coming in means less foreign exchange, and therefore that would have the effect on the exchange rate. Similarly, routine imports, exports either generate foreign currency or they use foreign currency. Now, it's also important to remember, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when we think of Mongolia as being, in a way, a small country that is buffeted by external factors, one of those external factors is what's going on in the world with exchange rates. So the dollar itself is a moving target. And this is something that I think has to be kept in mind. And economists often, for this reason, use a different type of measure called the real effective exchange rate. And if you look at that measure, then recently actually the tugrek has not been depreciating as fast as many other commodity exporting countries because of the dollar's movement.
How do you see the perspective of the U.S. dollar, the world?
I don't
But
venture guesses
keep
on.
going stronger in general directions.
I don't venture a guess on these sorts of things, but of course they potentially have a big impact on Mongolia. There's also, I think, a lot of eyes looking towards what's happening in growth rates and Mongolia's main trading partners, what may be happening to interest rates worldwide, which depends a lot on policy decisions being made in the United States. So all of these things are, in a way, unknowns for the Mongolian economy, and what we tried to emphasize in the report was to try to orient policies in a way that's fairly conservative, so that the economy is ready, and so that policymakers have a little bit of flexibility if some bad risk manifests itself. So of course we always hope that everything will go great, but be a little more safe and prudent. You have to try to prepare for what could be a difficult situation as well, and that's just being sensible.
Along with this change in U.S. dollar and Mongolian tugrek exchange rate changing, that when dollar is becoming more expensive, it's one of the reasons driving the import to go down. And at the same time, when our export goes sluggish, so we have this balance deficit, better than before, but overall the volume is becoming less. In that sense, we expect in Mongolia the growth of non-mining sectors export which hopefully will help with the Mongolian competitiveness. And now there are lots of movements around that talk around to export other things other than mining products. How do you see that? Do you follow what's going on in non-mining sector?
I mean, first it's something that I think everyone agrees is extremely important, is to greater diversify the economy, and then it won't be so susceptible to big shocks and have such big movements in growth. The non-mining economy, of course, depends on many things. It depends on a sound, strong, safe business environment. We were quite happy to see that Mongolia has been paying some attention to the business environment and improved a little bit in the rankings of some of our colleagues in Washington, the doing business indicators. From my perspective, I look at these things with a long-term perspective and view, and really we can't expect a very quick turnaround in these sorts of things, but you need to think about the long-term competitiveness in Mongolia, and that means having a healthy, well-educated population. I saw a very nice sign of optimism on this a few weeks ago when we had one of our educational economists here, and he did a little bit of analysis on the returns to schooling as an investment, because schooling is in a way an investment, and showed that over time the returns are actually increasing.
Interesting.
Even at the same time that attainment is going up. So the number of years of schooling on average has been going up for 20 years or so, since it kind of dipped in the 90s and then has been coming back up. And despite the fact that there are more people with higher education, the returns to that education is still increasing. That means that there is still demand for.
That's good news.
That's good news, and
for long run in particular.
I see a lot of entrepreneurial thinking and innovation, and I think Mongolia needs to foster this sense of entrepreneurship, but also build the institutions that support that, and that means strong property rights. That means contracts that.
It should not be on the scene kind of attempts by private sector alone. It should be institutions that can support, make sure that they go smooth in terms of administration, etc. Jim, the big concern of all Mongolians today is our foreign debt. In your report, if you take all Mongolians' foreign debt, including commercial banks, everybody, we come to the level of 160% of GDP today. Recently, there was the Financial Times wrote an article in which it says Mongolia has now more debt than Greece in terms of, in the ratio, in terms of a ratio to GDP. It's way high, 160. If you take the private debts, it's 65%, according to your report. I mean, it's becoming already critical. Plus, 2 days ago, we have signed for another $1 billion as debt with China. How do you see that debt and capacity to pay back perspective?
Well, yeah, you just said it right there. So one question is the amount of debt, the level of debt. The other side of the equation is capacity to pay back. So for Mongolia, when you look at the debt levels, and again, the institutions, the FSL was set up several years ago to try, in a way, to constrain debt accumulation, constrain structural budget deficit. But once you get to a certain point where you have debt, the real issue is to keep a close eye on the level of debt and remember where debt comes from. Debt comes from spending when you're taking in revenues. And so it means each year looking carefully at the budget and being sure that you will be able to sustain the amount of borrowing and the amount of debt.
Which we certainly not doing.
Well, but I think, again, you have to distinguish between a country which has a short-term debt problem and those that have a longer-term problem. If you look at ability to pay back, then Mongolia is in some ways in a very good position in a longer term because it does have, as I mentioned, an increasingly educated population. It has considerable mineral resources, and there's some roadmap now to see greater exploitation of the second phase of OT, et cetera. And so the ability to be able to sustain that, of course, it's something every country has to watch carefully, but it is a country with long-term positive growth prospects, and the key should be not so much saying, well, we have X amount of debt, as it is an issue of where the debt is coming from and how it's used.
Yeah.
So the debt is coming from budget deficits. The way it's used, is it being used in a way that will increase growth or not? And these are the sorts
which
of
is not, which is kind of problematic today. It's very debatable because some Genghis Khan money, bond money, went to a road which does not pay on time. It is long-term investment, though it is needed. But there are several questions about the efficiency of use of that Genghis Khan bonds. However, whatever is the usage, but we are paying about $70 million every month now with 1.5. Just I'm talking about Genghis bond, and we start to pay $500 million early 2018, which was supposed to pay after 5 years, means in December 2017. But that's 1 month after we pay. But that one day we have to pay $500 million US. That's a huge. If current, say the current rate, current budget, according to your estimation, economy is not much growing. Say that we have that time with the current rate about $3 billion US total budget. Then 1/6 of this budget will go one day to the paying of that debt. It's unrealistic for this country unless we have a separate accumulation for paying. How to do?
Yeah, well, of course, the repayments are something that need to be addressed, and I know our government has that in their mind. But the key is to have the economy on a healthy footing to be able to manage that. It doesn't mean that they're going to have that amount and just pay it and be done with it.
Yes.
It means to have the economy on a healthy footing so that they can manage that as part of a prudent debt management system, which means governments typically borrow sometimes at the same time that they're repaying other debts. But the important thing is, again, be sure that the money is used in a prudent way and that it's sustainable, and to be on a healthy macro footing to be able to manage that as we get closer. It means keeping the budget deficit reasonable.
But if there's any way for World Bank and IMF to make the government be a little bit responsible for this sort of payment, because it's way large than we can pay.
Well, we don't, it's not our role to make anyone do anything. It is our role, as with this report, to give our independent assessment of how we see things.
That
and hopefully it's useful for those in the government, for those in the private sector, for yourself.
This is truly helpful because it's an independent report. I know not everybody is happy with this report, but however, thank you for doing that. you, your office, and it gives us the rational food for thoughts and to look at the things in a realistic way. Thank you very much for coming to this
thank you.
program. Thank you. За бүлэгчтэй өнөөдөр манай фактны нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Дэлхийн банкны суурин төлөөлөгч доктор Жеймс Андерсон оролцлоо. Баярлалаа.
Энэ бол iPhone 6s. Дэмжих өөрчлөгдөөгүй. Гэхдээ хурууны даралтыг мэдэрнэ. Ингэснээр текстийн мэдээллийг уншихад өөр болсон. Имэйл уншихад, мэдээ уншихад байз чи мэдээ уншдаг гэж үү?
Yup.
Оо тэгэлгүй дээ. Камерын 4K бичлэг хийж селфи хийхэд эргэцэн гэрэлтүүлж өгнө. Энд ч нэгсээ лайк цуглуулна да.
Thanks.
Зургнууд нь бас өөрчлөгдөж амьд болсон. Та хүрээд үз. Тийм ээ, энэ бол өөрчлөгдсөн зүйлс.